Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the SUMP Training Module 3 webinar about collection of data for active modes. My name is Sibelius, and I'm one of your hosts today. I work for the Union of the Baltic Cities Sustainable Cities Commission that is hosted by the city of Turku in Finland, and we are the lead partner in the SUMPs for BSR project that is organizing this training program. The project is co-funded by the Interreg BSR program. And now I will give the stage to my co-host today.
Good morning. My name is Maarja Käger. I'm from Institute of Baltic Studies and I'm co-hosting today.
Thank you, Maarja. We're both working in the SUMPs for BSR project, where we are supporting the small and mid-sized cities to develop and apply sustainable urban mobility planning. And we have been working in the project since 2023, and our focus has been strongly on encouraging shift towards active mobility, improved data collection, and development of monitoring and evaluation practices. And you can browse through the news and articles on our project websites to learn more. This webinar is part of a 5-module online training program on the sustainable urban mobility planning, and it's one of our key activities in the SUMPs for BSR project. It's designed for the mobility planners and experts in the small and mid-sized cities in the Baltic Sea region and beyond. And all of the training modules consists of a webinar, a practically oriented engaging workshop, as well as some individual exercises and learning materials. And all of the materials, including recordings, will be available on the Baltic Sea Region SUMP Competence Center. And you can see the link there and the QR code that takes you to the Competence Center website, and you can also find the agendas and registration there for all our upcoming events. I'd like to also share you greetings from our sister project, BSR Urban Mobility, that will actually continue the training after our project. And in addition to sustainable urban mobility planning, the topics will cover peer learning opportunities for Baltic Sea region urban nodes, sustainable urban logistics planning, and multimodal hubs and urban logistics, as well as they will continue promoting active mobility. So you can sign up for their newsletter to stay informed about the upcoming trainings in this BSR Urban Mobility platform project. But now it's time to take a look in our agenda for today. And we're diving into the world of active mobility data, walking and cycling data, and talk how to collect it, how to interpret it, how to use it to drive change in the mobility planning. And we will begin with an expert presentation about why active mobility data is important for SUMPs. By Associate Professor Poom from the Mobility Lab of University of Tartu, followed by some case examples and experiences from cities. First on data collection for active mobility, presented to us by the Deputy Mayor of City of Tartu, Kertu Vuks. And then we will hear about a specific case of collecting data through piloting a cycling campaign done with a mobile app, presented to us by Aregay Fkadu from Gävle municipality in Sweden. And finally, we will hear examples from different pilots in the Baltic Sea Region project about engaging citizens in collection of data from Andra Asser and Maarja Käger from Institute of Baltic Studies. And I would like to remind you about a few practical things. The webinar is being recorded, and you will get the recording at our Baltic Sea Region SUMP Competence Center website that I mentioned earlier. And attendees are most welcome to ask questions, and you can do it within the Q&A box that you can see in the Zoom panel. And now I will give the word back to Maarja.
Thank you. And as Ira mentioned, our first speaker is Aregay Poom, who is Associate Professor in Urban Environment at the University of Tartu and head of the Mobility Lab, where she leads interdisciplinary research on human mobility, environmental exposure, and just mobility transitions. And today she will share us insights on measuring active mobility, why data matters for sustainable urban mobility plans. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ira and Maarja. Very nice. So I hope I come through. Yes. Welcome to everybody, also from my side. Very happy to be here with you today. And I find this training module highly interesting and most valuable for the urban transitions and sustainable mobility challenges that we face in those turbulent times. So very much appreciated. When I now start, let's pause a moment to think about why are we talking about collecting data about active urban mobility. Actually, data on active urban mobility, on walking and cycling, has been rarely there. However, walking and cycling are the most universal forms of urban movement. They have been there for centuries. They are so taken for granted that they have not been an object, a target of themselves for a very long time. To know why walking is used or why people walk, why people cycle, why do they not do that, in which conditions do they do that, and in which not, where do they do that, and how do they penetrate through the urban fabric, even if there's no road infrastructure there. So how is their mobility supported by the urban fabric is not very systematically targeted because they anyway exist. And that's, of course, an issue. That's a problem. If we don't know actually where people move, where people walk or cycle, or why do they not do it, if we cannot measure it, we also cannot systematically, evidence-basedly improve the urban fabric for them, nor the urban mobility services or any infrastructure. And we know that it has been a paradigm to focus on motorized traffic since the Second World War. And this has been also covered in your previous sessions in this training cycle. But we also know that modeling walking or modeling cycling has its own complexities. Why traditional transport modeling and transport planning have not focused on those issues. For example, if we are modeling walking, we should also model very often multimodality. We walk to public transit stops, to train stops, or we might nowadays even walk to bike share dock stations and take a dog from there, which means that we already need to model multimodality. And that increases a lot of complexities into this field of studies. Another reason is that the responsibility of the benefits of walking and cycling is fragmented or is detached from the bodies who make the investments to enable people to walk and cycle in our urban spaces. So that if we think about the national healthcare services who pay for the healthcare costs, so they do not do the infrastructure investments into our pedestrian lanes or cycling lanes or noise reduction programs on local level. So local level investments are taken care of by local municipalities, while the public health benefits might be visible only on another layer or among the institutional bodies. So this fragmentation also has hindered planning cities for walking and cycling and collecting data to know what we aim to do and how to know whether we actually improve towards our goals. So what happens when active mobility is invisible? So first, infrastructure underinvestment. Without evidence of demand, we cannot really justify whether the investments that we make have been really efficient and whether they have actually created a change. Flawed evaluation. Without baseline data, we also don't know whether the travel behavior has changed due to this infrastructure. And we can't negotiate, we can't have argumentation for further infrastructure investments. Walking and cycling as means of travel which are the cheapest. There are the least cost associated with them, which means that they are accessible for also the most marginalized or the most vulnerable groups of our society. Those who do not own a driver's license or are not allowed to drive a car themselves or cannot afford it on economic reasons. The children, older people, low income residents. So those groups that most heavily rely on active urban mobility are then invisible in the data if we only monitor motorized traffic. So they are disproportionately affected by the absence of data that would then reveal why they use or why they do not use walking or cycling in certain conditions. Or how do they feel threatened, for example, by other travelers in their travel environment. And another thing are the injuries or crash reports, incidents that happen. If a car gets crashed, there is an insurance involved and you need to report it. You're interested in that you would get a refund for that. But in pedestrian and cycling crashes, if there are no very severe health like injuries or bodily injuries, these crashes are often not reported. So again, we actually do not get all the data and we do not detect the dangerous spots in our urban travel infrastructure that should get further notice. Quite often we see the situation that there is some data set and let's start to use it. Let's see what happens, what does the data show us. And this kind of exploratory approach is really welcomed in research. But in public sector, for municipalities, leaning only on data that already exists there, but what we haven't guided ourselves, or like we haven't set the objectives that we exactly want to collect that kind of data. We just take what it is out there. It's a common flaw. So very often we see that monitoring and the technology starts with the things that are already provided, but they are not planned for the objectives or goals that we actually want to achieve and monitor them in our urban spaces. So we actually do not get the answers to the real questions that we have or the real goals that we have set jointly in our community. So first, it is important to understand what do we want to achieve by this sustainable urban mobility plan, for example. What exactly is the thing that we want to achieve? So what matters to us? And then what kind of data might reflect whether we actually achieve the objective or not? What kind of knowledge is needed and how do we actually get to this knowledge? So there is knowledge, there is data, but data doesn't mean knowledge exactly, but there are many steps in between. So we have to plan and we have to guide the process of different data collections, different secondary data usages, different data processing. Certainly a multi-method approach is necessary. So to understand what kind of combination of data we actually need to reach this wisdom and to reach this evidence that helps us evaluate our performance. So this understanding why do we collect data and what do we want to achieve actually in urban space guides our data collection strategy. And then it also creates this accountability. We can actually show that whether investments in active mobility infrastructure have paid off, for example, if that has been our goal. And data collection without clear objective is expensive, inconclusive, it's very fragmented. We see, so, let's buy two counters, bicycle counters, put them somewhere, collect data for a year or two perhaps, as long as we have the project money, and then we just forget about the counters. We don't have any more data collection upcoming. The system is not sustainable, the data collection system. We have just a fragmented data episode in our history, but we do not see the longer trends. And so active mobility might become like more aspirational rather than evidence-based. And we can't have like long-term or longitudinal data collection strategy to actually monitor and track whether we progress towards the goals that we set in this Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan. Yet I want to highlight that I, as a researcher or from this academic sector, I'm very much keen on different types of data that are out there. And that data have been collected for some purposes, might open up new possibilities, new avenues, new horizons that were never imagined before. And they may, data collected for other purposes might start serving for very good purposes elsewhere in other sectors. But just that most likely is not the case that you want to lean on in this sustainable urban mobility transition on the local government end. So the objectives, what you set, they might of course be different. You have also covered several of them. We might want to have a modal shift towards active modes, towards sustainable urban mobility modes. We might want to reduce safety. We might want to improve the health and well-being and the satisfaction of our community members. And we might also want that the environment and the climate do not get affected by our human behavior. And that goal then needs to be translated into very actionable, specific indicator and data monitoring framework. So let's bring an example. So if we want to achieve more or higher share of urban cycling, to increase the share in the modal split, the benefit of cycling. So how can we measure it? So should it be, for example, the kilometers of bike lanes built, or the bike share trips per day per 1,000 inhabitants if we have a bike share system, or trips made by bicycle and other modes, so that we can actually calculate the modal split. So these are all different types of indicators. Bike lanes tell us about the infrastructure. They are the output indicators. Bike share trips per day per 1,000 inhabitants tell about the process indicators. But only the trips made by bicycle and by other modes gives us the knowledge about the outcome, whether travel behavior itself has changed or not. So we also need to set a baseline where we stand now. We need to have data for the baseline, and then we need to set the objectives and monitor it systematically, continuously, to get this kind of data trend over time. And what kind of data exists there for active mobility? This is not now a conclusive list, but we might classify or categorize data types into different classes then. The volume and flow. So we can answer how much active travel is actually happening and what is its share in all movements. We can talk about network infrastructure quality. So does the built environment support walking and cycling? We can talk about safety, how safe active travel environments are for pedestrians and cyclists, as well as for other travelers. We can talk about environmental and urban design quality. So the physical environment, does it support walking and cycling and human health? The environmental quality like air pollution or noise pollution or greenery. We can talk about accessibility. So does land use and mobility service provision support walking and cycling? Like public transit or mobility hubs or bike share system and micromobility share system. And we might also ask how people experience active travel. So what is the user experience and what are the social impacts? And here it is the very important point that when we collect data, we should also collect data about the meta level, about the people who respond or who are affected or who move. So not only how they move, but also who they are. What is their socioeconomic composition or what is the background factor? Where do they live? What are the contextual factors their household factors that might affect their travel choices and travel behavior. And for the same categories, there are many different elements for what to collect data. I will not go them through like one by one here. You can go in depth and looking into these examples also from the slides later. But some examples. For example, when we take volume and flow, perhaps this is the most easiest thing to understand where should we locate those counters. So what are the key locations like junctions or access points or bridges? But perhaps we have some intervention area. Perhaps we have some bike lane which has been introduced, or some new infrastructure. Perhaps we have some soft weather campaigns in some local neighborhood among a community. And then we want to actually locate those counters into this very intervention area and not just randomly anywhere else. Because we need to be able to monitor then whether the intervention has a causal effect on the travel behavior. And if it's very random, we actually cannot associate the effects in travel behavior to a very specific intervention. So where to count is a very important aspect to think about. And this is very strongly related to the aims, the objectives. Why do you want to have the counts overall in the first place? But then it comes to the temporal aspects. So when to count? Is it a continuous monitoring? Or do we set a drone with a regular like mobility pattern, a drone pattern, when the drone monitors the state of the art in our urban spaces, so where people are. So these technologies already exist and are in use. Most traditionally, this when question is answered according to the traffic intensity, because again, it is very much linked to the motorized traffic and this kind of road infrastructure network and the efficiency of those investments. So we look at the peak hours and the off-peak hours, but we also look on weekdays and weekends, because our activity spaces, our mobility behavior patterns vary across the day, across the week, across the year. We know that our lives are very cyclic. And there might be some specific campaigns, of course. When there is this kind of intervention, you might want to monitor before and after to get the data on the baseline as well as after the intervention. But of course, what is the benefit of the counters if they are those automated counters? They can monitor continuously, and you can see the diversity and the dynamics in pedestrian flows or cyclist flows then throughout the year or throughout several years. And what to report, for example, when we already have the data, then what are the indicators then exactly? Because we might think or come up with like gazillion different indicators, what to make out of the data that we have collected. So again, what is the most important thing that you want the data to reflect? And according to that, you must also then allocate the KPI or the indicator. So are these annual average daily volumes? Or is it pedestrian or cyclist count per hour, per any hour, or per peak hour? Do you want to have different directional splits? Do you want to calculate, monitor those in the first place? But point data in urban mobility is quite poor. You actually don't get much knowledge about that. It's very location specific, very particularly bound to only this very location. So we need to actually advance from the point data to trip data. And trip always has a route. So what is the origin and destination? And what is the spatial zoning or the spatial accuracy? How do we want to then count the trip count or the number of trips, each street segment, like street edge. And we see that, okay, those are very intensively used street segments, and those need additional investments in cycling infrastructure, for example, or in pedestrian infrastructure, while other streets are really for local commuting or local mobility only, and we do not need that big investments in there. But you know always that behavior follows the conditions very often. So the conditions might open up new behavior, the latent demand. In Tartu, when we did not have bike share system, so many people were arguing that, hey, where are the cyclists? I don't see them. Why do we need this kind of bike share system? And today we know that we are one of the leading bike share system cities in the whole Europe. So the system is so actively in use. It has been a great success. And you couldn't have it without this infrastructure, without this mobility service. So we might argue that we don't need bike lanes if we don't have them, because people do not use them if they do not exist. And the data tells us that there's zero cyclist on a bike lane. So think about like those things that your human behavior is always a complex of very many conditions, and you need to provide the services or the opportunities for people to be able to cycle then, for example, on bike lanes or use bike share system. So let's get away from points to routes, origin destination matrices, etc. And here is an example of Tartu bike share system usage. We are making a study about route choice among cyclists. And here we do not only see at the volumes are there behind it, but we see the edges, the street segments, what people tend to avoid or what people tend to prefer when cycling in Tartu. And the red lines, the red streets, are those streets where we expect that people would cycle because this is the shortest path or this has the infrastructure to use it. But these are otherwise very unpleasant or not unsafe, and people do not want to get there or use those. While then we see those darker green ones, which are then strongly preferred street segments in Tartu. So it has a reason why people choose those streets over some others. They choose them more than we could just model without this kind of baseline knowledge. And we know it because Tartu bike share system is very exceptional. It is a dock-based system. We know the origins and destinations, but it also has a GPS tracking with on a very precise level, and it allows very exact spatial analysis to be made. Furthermore, it has the information on age and gender, so we also know the different how different social groups prefer their different routes. This is the work in progress that we are currently doing. And we also know that how people are using bike share system depending on the dock location. So assuming that people who in the morning take the dock in one neighborhood also live in that neighborhood. So we don't know about anything more about them. We don't know their home locations. So GPS data collection and bike share system is possible when there is a dock-based system, not a floating or dockless system, because of privacy aspects. And here Tartu has done exceptionally well. Or another example, checking the time as well. Another example is how can route choice reduce exposure to pollution, to air pollution or noise pollution. Model the shortest paths, and we calculate the health conditions then, or the health attributes, the exposure to air pollution, exposure to noise pollution, and exposure to greenery on the shortest path. And then we check how long people, or how big detour people need to make the route in a more pleasant travel environment, where there is less noise or less air pollution and there is more greenery. So you can take the movement data and put it into another context and get indicators about other, for example, mobility or health or well-being or social inequality indicators. So if you ask those questions. And we can also attach, like here also in Helsinki or in Tartu, we also know, like when I said that we assign people to that neighborhood where they take the bike in the morning, and we assume that they are the residents of that neighborhood. Then from population register, we also know what is the average social composition of that neighborhood, the socioeconomic composition, the age group, the education levels, the ethnicity or the mother tongue, income levels or occupational status. So this kind of background information allows us to make very interesting and very informative analysis for cities to understand different segregation aspects and injustice or inequality aspects in our urban mobility infrastructure and mobility service provision, or accessibility as an example. So sure, you know that, like, or we all know that the speeds are different across modes, and they must be. That's very logical. But here is one example how accessible from the railway station in Helsinki are different other locations in the metropolitan area. And here on the left-hand side, you see public transit follows very strongly those fingers or the main roads and in railway lines, while biking or cycling is really very competitive to public transit as well as private car. You don't have the congestion for bikes. You have very excellent cycling infrastructure built in there, and you can penetrate by bike the urban fabric very well. So it's a very competitive and cheap alternative to motorized traffic, and very healthy one as well. Or here we monitored over a year. Actually, this example is for 3 months monitoring of mobility, daily activity spaces of people living either in the suburban area in Tallinn or in a central district core urban area in Tallinn. There were 2 neighborhoods involved in that study. Here is the map of those living in the suburb, in the high estate housing area. And via monitoring their activity space by smartphone apps, they were volunteers in this study. We knew what are their daily destinations, and then we laid it over with public transit schedules. And public transit always involves walking bits as well. So walking and public transit always come together, or public transit use always comes with walking. And we then checked how many of those daily destinations are actually accessible by walking or the use of public transit within half an hour. And here we see that those, again, the central location and the eastern suburb of Tallinn, the accessibility rates differ significantly by favored. Of course, the central location is so much favored. People have their activity space locations within half an hour reach by public transit, and that's not the case in the suburban areas where still over 100,000 people live. So a very strong social indicator. Or the same study when we have really long data sets of mobility behavior. We have determined what kind of mobility modes did they use, because the GPS data allows us to do that. and we see from there that people are not monomobile. People do not use only one modal split or travel mode per day, per week, or per year. Although we want to monitor, we want to highlight in the in all documents and in all communications that the share is like that, or like that many percentage of people are car users, and that many percentage of people are public transit users, or pedestrians or cyclists. So actually, we all are multimodal. And over these kind of long data collection periods, we can understand which people belong to which modality style over time. And a similar study has been just recently conducted also in North America, where they say that their it was 3 months data is exceptionally long GPS data for studying these kind of modality styles, bike-oriented or walk-oriented people, where do they live, who are benefited by this infrastructure. That is then in Boston area. So there are different ways how to collect data. So about what we covered, so about how, is it manual counts, digital traces, registers, as I told about the population register, how we know about the neighborhood composition, but we also know from the registers where people work or where people study, and we create the origin destination matrices. And then we can see that how well are the destinations accessible by walking, cycling, or public transit provision. Automated sensors and different surveys and self-reported data. No single method is sufficient, so various types and data and methods are mostly complementary. They support each other because they tell different story. So here we checked bike share data and asked, made a review of different studies that had used bike share data, and we checked what kind of questions did they ask. So whether they asked when people travel, where people travel, who are the people who travel, why do they travel, and what do they do during travel. And we see that those automated data collection methods like bike share, trip data, or GPS tracking, sports applications, bike counters, they always answer the questions when and where, but they are very poor in answering who or why questions. While surveys, interviews, or PPGIS surveys, those online surveys equipped with geoinformatic layers, they can understand the questions why and who very well, and in which conditions, what are the purposes. Likewise, in another study where we checked the outdoor recreational behavior, so again, walking and cycling outdoors, so we asked the same questions and checked also the different data sources, participatory mapping, this PPGIS, GPS devices, social media, telecom data for mobile network operators, different sports apps, or then smartphone tracking apps. So again, we checked what kind of questions did those studies ask, and participatory mapping, for example, could answer the most of the questions, while some other data collection methods could only answer very specific questions like GPS devices run poor, again, like in who or why, or but again, they can tell us about where and when people have moved. And finally, here about data governance and privacy aspects, what I also wanted to bring out. These are super important aspects in our today's world, and we need to ensure data privacy. And if there is data, sensitive data or individual data, personal data, and if it is combined with location information, there is very strong risk that the persons are reversely identified, and this risk has to be mitigated very strongly. So those procedures, who is the owner, who is the data controller, who is the data processor, who can have access, to whom you share the data, what is the data collection standard, data quality assurance framework, how those questions are responded, they are super important for a very professional data infrastructure setup. So before starting to collect any of the data, all of those questions need to be considered very thoroughly. And perhaps I want to highlight this kind of the access and sharing point, because the municipalities use secondary data from other data providers, but they also collect data which can be used by very many other stakeholder groups. And to think already from the very beginning, what are the conditions, how we share the data, what are the technical standards, what are the legal requirements, what kind of geo-privacy rules we need to apply, and what kind of technical, legal, organizational expectations to be put on our data users. So these are all contract related issues. And key principles: data minimization, collect only the data that is needed. Purpose limitations. So again, you only use data for the purposes that you have been collecting the personal data. But once you anonymize it, it can be used for any other purposes as well. So anonymization and aggregation before storage, if possible. But we also know that there is a strong data loss once the data might be anonymized. So how do you anonymize? Like, what are the, for example, those geo-privacy rules? So how to sustain this raw data, individual level data, not only aggregated data, for further research questions that might come up later. And transparent communication to the public, why data is collected and what kind of data is collected. And data quality is something that we always, like in any data set, data processing might require 80% of our time, and 20% of our time goes to the analysis. So when you set up the data collection procedures, it's super important to think about the reliability and accuracy aspects, and make the controls and make the data quality assurance framework. What is the input data control? What is the output data control aspects? Mistakes are very, very, very typical. So there are different procedures how to go on with this, like data cleaning procedures, gap filling. Perhaps there, even in Tartu data, we might see like very strange mistakes, like trips are happening in the future. Like they're very rare ones, but sometimes it happens that the data involves mistakes, and then you have to spot them. And make sure that the data is interoperable with other machines, as well as other systems, that you use standardized data. You have metadata, very well documented metadata about what has been collected. Oh, the field names are constantly the same. For example, when you change the counter location due to some road construction, then document it, log it, that this counter location, the coordinates have been changed for this period of time. So again, a super typical mistake, that the counters go all over, but you never can track down again, like where the data exactly was collected during that date, because this just has been poorly reported and documented. This is now all from my end. I will add still, or I will have some slides afterwards coming up, so which I most likely will have also in this PDF setting about one ongoing process or project where we have collected data via a two-way travel survey. And there are some hints, like what kind of things you can ask in a survey. So like it's not only counts or not only modes, there are many more aspects. So I will leave that one like for a dessert later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Age. Very, very interesting presentation, and it's definitely worth of looking the recording later on and checking again the slides. We don't have any questions at the moment, but if someone has, then please ask, and we try to collect answers from Age if she has to leave, but Age, you have possibility to answer as well. And the next presenter is Kertu Vuks. She has extensive experience in the public sector in the fields of development and spatial planning. And currently she serves as deputy mayor of the city of Tartu, where she is responsible for architecture, building, urban design, and spatial planning. So a lot of experiences from the city of Tartu with the collection and use of mobility data. So Kertu, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm trying to share my screen for now. And also I heard what Age already talked to you. Many things that Tartu has done has been together with University of Tartu and with Age's team. So we have maybe some topics that are overlapping as well. But I was asked to explain what Tartu has been doing and what are the future plans. in the case of mobility and mobility data collection, as well what we have learned during this interesting journey. At first, I know that there are not only Estonians here who are listening to us today, so just a short overview what we are talking about today, and I'm using the brand new, not even the document isn't ready yet, but I really like the picture that I'm showing to you right now. It's a picture from Estonian National Plan that ministry is putting together right now. And if you don't know where Tartu is in Estonia, you can see it now here. You can see that we have not only intercity mobility issues with buses or public cars and bikes, but also we have now we have a plane connection, and we have really big hopes in our railway system to develop really good connections outside Tartu to connect us with the world, to connect us with Tallinn, with Riga. But a bit about Tartu as well. The most important thing to what we keep in mind as in the city government is that we want to make a city for people, for those who are living in Tartu, and also for those who are studying here and those who are visiting Tartu. So just a short overview here. I know Tartu is a university city that makes our challenges a bit different maybe compared to other Estonian cities. And we have aimed to be a part of international economy and culture while we still want to maintain our core values for our inhabitants, so that our city would be compact and sustainable living environment is still good in cooperation with citizens as well as other municipalities in the region and also outside Estonia. And we were a cultural capital 2024, what was also a year when many different and new innovative things started and hopefully are lasting also in the future. But now let's talk about mobility. Just for you to understand that Tartu is not only Tartu as a city in that sense. On the right hand side, you see that this is the area where our different, this is the main core city area on the right hand side. But after the administrative reform, in 2018, a pretty huge rural area was also included into the city. So many mobility issues that we are dealing today are connected to the area outside the city in that sense. And one of the things I want to share with you today is our a way to plan a city based on different services that we have in the city and also what will be there in the future. So on the right hand side, you see we call it the accessibility map, but sometimes the original label for this work was a parking strategy map, so that the idea there is that if you see the red area in the center of the city marks the places where the services are very well located, so that there shouldn't be that many parking spaces, and we can do those things when we are planning the city a bit differently than the standards are saying us to do. Why this is important also planning the mobility is that this data that we have collected and put into this GIS map solution, you can only see the picture on the right hand side, but if you're interested, I can share the link later as well. This map shows us in which areas different services are available and which areas are those that changes in the future needs to be done. And this is also something that we use for mobility planning. And as I said, all those card materials or those solutions that we have built in Tartu are done based on ARKIS solutions, so that our own people in our own house can modify them and have a pretty good knowledge why things are there the way they are. So in this map way we use it for city planning, we use it for mobility planning, and this is a really good tool also for developers. I know that many real estate developers are using the data that we have collected into this accessibility map here to plan and to also to maybe in some senses to sell their area based on the services that are provided in the area there. And a bit more how we have developed the system, how we know where and what times and with what volume the different modality groups are moving inside the city. Together with Tartu University, we have developed this platform. As Aage already said, although the platforms are using the data from different sensors on the streets, we still need to keep an eye on how we what we do with the data and are there any mistakes in there. This is just a screenshot from some random day. I think it's 10th of August 2024. On the right hand side, you see the daily modal split. Here we can see how many vehicles, how many pedestrians, how many buses were moving in that day, and how this modality is divided between those different groups. And also on the lower part of the slide, you cannot see it, but if you look at the solution later on, you can see how those groups are divided among different hours. In everyday life, we still use this solution, but we are developing it further. This is one solution that our teams are using to get an overview how we are doing when it comes to different mobility groups inside the city. One our so-called success stories is Tartu smart bike share. Why it is really very popular. We are still developing it further, although we have had some technical issues on the way. But yearly the new electrical bikes are being used, and also new stations are developed together with our neighboring municipalities, and we are also seeing how many trips are done by the bikes with the bikes in the city. Here you can just see a small fragment of the map Tartu, where you can see that the darker lines are representing those streets where the bike share trips are more frequent. This also gives us a pretty good overview where the bikes are used, and as I said, it is really popular, and we count it in as a part of our public transportation system. So this is extra to the bus system. For those who don't want to use bus, you can have a bike share for that. But of course, we have other Bolt or mainly a Bolt who is doing their services in Tartu, but right now I'm talking about only our own bike sharing system. Our bus network has also been recently reorganized. Here you can see the lines of the bus network, and the data for organizing the bus network was also the lines that were created were all the data of the movements were taken into account to create these lines. So previously, the buses were doing many round trips. Here you can see that almost all the bus lines are taking the route so that you have to change the bus in the center of the city to change the route. So yeah, this is something also that were done using our own collected mobility data for that, and we have still available, and we are using it as well, online data for seeing how many buses in which areas are located, and how long it will take to wait the bus in different bus stops. We have started collecting real-time data a long time ago. At our first automatic activity mobility counters were created or placed in the city around 2016 and 17, and we are still using it. The data is automatically stored in our central database, and we can monitor it real time. And this data also analyzes the traffic volumes on pedestrian and cycling paths, as well as the movement patterns of cyclists and pedestrians. And also we have placed over time different technologies to collect the data about cars and buses and the uses of different streets in Tartu, and it has been and it will be also in the future a path of testing, learning, and improving the system, because the costs are different. We need to understand how much money we need for those developments in the future, and also what solutions are the best for our needs. And also what is on our table right now is to create a better understanding, putting together all the data that we collect in Tartu to cut out the faults in the systems and to use it better. Also like this, that for example, if we have some kind of new plan, a general plan or new development plan in some points of the city, we enter the data there, and the system should understand how many traffic will be extra in the streets in the future. So this is something we want to develop for the future. But as I already said, the process has been a lot of testing, a lot of learning and improving on the way, because some technologies are not that good for us. The technology changes and develops, so we just need to keep the step, and it's also important for us that the data should be managed and accessible in-house, so that our colleagues can, and they have to know how to use it in everyday life to make better solutions, better decisions, and to create better solutions for our citizens and also our visitors. Just a last picture, one traffic map from 2023 versus 2040, where we have tried to explore the scenarios showing how different traffic changes can change, and also how it goes together with our climate plan targets. But my time is up. I know I have to close it now. But we have also created a model for existing walking and cycling volumes, where you can easily click on different layers of the map to see in which streets how many pedestrians are moving, how many cyclists are there, and how this all goes together with our city general plan. So thank you, and I'm ready for the questions.
Thank you. At the moment, we don't have questions in questions and answers section, but I have a question. If you have
Yeah.
these nice maps with volumes, do you use these, for example, deciding where to carry out construction works or how wide pedestrian pathways to have?
Yeah, this is a really good question. If you're Estonian, you know that this is on our tables right now, how in Tartu in the future we should do better solutions according to the real data we have and also the future data that might be there when there are changes in the inhabitants. And yes, the answer is that yes, we are using it, but it is totally depending the concrete location as well. So what we are doing is we are combining right now the different data sets that we have. But as I already said, we are the problem is there that our data sets are lacking sometimes the possibility to put them together, and there are still faults in it. So you have to be smart to use the data. You just cannot look at the numbers and say that, okay, in this street we don't need, for example, a bike road because no one is riding there. Keeping in mind that right now no one cannot ride there because there are no street at all right in the moment. So yeah.
Okay, thank you for this answer.
I would actually also have a short question. Tartu seems to be very advanced in using different technologies and using the data. So can you give other cities recommendations on the key skills and capacities that would be needed to do this in such a great way that Tartu has done?
Thank you for the compliment. Us are not satisfied with the solutions ourselves right now. We want to develop it further, but I think for us the key has been working together with the University of Tartu. So working together with the scientists is a very, very important factor there, as well. A really good in-house capability of using different, for example, in our case, GIS ArcGIS solutions, so that the data will come and it will be presented in the map in the way that even those who are not analytics or have the special knowledge can understand how the data is translated into something more understandable. And what we have been doing is that starting from, I don't know, 2015 and later, we have used different European funded projects to get the money for those different sensors and different solutions. But there is also a darker side in that, as I already said, those different solutions might not match with each other. So you have to have an in-house knowledge, and you have to be wise because otherwise you're just spending a lot of money and you cannot do with those sensors anything when the times have passed. So, and of course, it needs an owner who is responsible for that field. In Tartu, we have a concrete person in urban design department, and this is also a key thing. And of course, a political will to develop it like that.
Thank you for the tips.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Kertu, for sharing. How have you tested? What have you learned? And what to do to improve, to really use the data? But our next presentation is from Aregay Kebede, who works as traffic analyst at Gävle municipality in Sweden. And he will share us experiences from piloting a mobile app-based campaign as a platform for data collection. And Gävle is one of those cities from the SUMPs for DSL project. So also testing, learning.
Nice. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Good. Yeah, today I am presenting Gävle's experience with piloting a mobile app to collect active mobility data, particularly walking and cycling. In the upcoming 15 minutes, I will briefly explain why this matters, the challenge we faced, our approach, key results, the lesson that we have learned, and practical takeaways for other cities. Yes. First, why do municipalities like Gävle promote active mobility so strongly? Walking and cycling aren't just ways to get around, as you all know. So they are very powerful tools that tackle several big challenges simultaneously. So active mobility helps us build climate neutral, healthier, and more livable cities. So which aligns perfectly with policies like sustainable urban mobility plans. So it's very, very important, and we have already got a good introduction about all this in the previous two presentations. But the main point is turning these ambitions, like all the policies and all the goals and objectives that are in urban mobility plans, sustainable urban mobility plans, to reality. And this entirely depends on having a good data. So without proper measurements, we cannot manage effectively. And climate targets, they need proof of progress. And for that, data is very important. And infrastructure decision must be based on also evidence, not guesses. So data here plays a vital role, and public money must show real results as well. So data is very, very important, as it is a bridge, as it is something that turns vision into practical and measurable change. And specifically for active mobility, comprehensive data helps us really, really understand how people travel today. It helps us design smart and targeted interventions, and also it helps us to know whether all the adopted measures and change works or not. So this is very important. Having a comprehensive data is very essential. Now let's talk a little bit about the real challenge. Why collecting good data on walking and cycling is so much harder for them than for cars. Active mobility data is often sparse. It's very seasonal. It is inconsistent, and behaviorally it's incomplete. And this creates a big gap between our policy ambitions and our actual planning capacity. First of all, the coverage is very limited. Short local trips under 5 kilometers and pedestrian flows in the neighborhoods, and all those informal shortcuts, desired lines, are rarely captured. We only have fixed counters and detectors that actually work great for main roads and particularly for cars too, but they miss most of the active trips as well. And secondly, the data we do have sometimes comes with many different sources, like there's like manual count, automatic bike counters, travel surveys, for example, apps, national data sets. So each has their own method, time frame, and format. And when attempting to combine them, so there is a possibility of getting inconsistent pictures, blind spots, and sometimes misguided infrastructure decisions because of that. So, and the other challenge that we had first was we usually know how many people are walking or cycling, but almost never why, because of those fixed detectors and measurement devices. We know how many people are walking or cycling, but we don't know why. So is it for commuting? Is it for school drop-off? Is it for recreation? Or do people avoid a route because of poor lighting or perceived danger? So we don't know, or bad weather. So we don't know the why behind the movement of people. So these behavioral drivers are very, very, very important. Of course, surveys help, but they are very expensive and infrequent. So these are the main challenges that we had faced in our municipality when it comes to active mobility. And also mentioning the seasonal and climate variability is also very important here. So if the real paradox is cities like Gävle depend on walking and cycling in order to meet climate neutrality, health, sustainability targets, but we often don't have the solid year-round behaviorally rich data we need to make smart decisions and to justify investments and also prove progress. So this is the core paradox, and that brings us to what was implemented in Gävle, which is a GPS-enabled mobile app pilot. Over the years, we've tried various measures in order to address the mentioned challenge, but there's no like single bulletproof silver bullet solution that can address every challenge. So the first reason for that is most of the challenges they are intertwined. So it's very hard to fix them with a single tool. So we tried to choose like a very systematic pilot GPS-enabled mobile app campaign and we wanted to somehow address like a certain like aspect of like most of the challenge. So we specifically have chosen this campaign, which is collecting active mobility data via GPS-enabled mobile app, because it kind of delivers multiple wins at once. For example, it provides comprehensive high-resolution coverage, which captures short neighborhood trips, informal shortcuts, pedestrian desire lines, and also other small movements that are carried out, which are not completely captured by traditional counters. And also it gives us the behavioral context. So we don't like not just where and how far, but why, the trip purpose, their route preference, the timing, and including participant feedback and rewards as well. And it offers also like very rapid, near real-time insights as well. So it's because of this reason that we had selected this specific pilot. Beyond all those reasons that I had mentioned, the application is also scalable. The app is very scalable, so it can be integrated with existing data, for example, GIS layers. It can be integrated with existing system, traffic web, that we usually upload the results from, like traffic counters, pneumatic tubes, and also we can have the opportunity to integrate it with existing surveys in order to have like a bigger picture. So yeah, and in addition to that, it crucially have what it takes to boost public engagement as well. Like participants get personal dashboard, badge, feedback on their sustainable choices. So this helps us build awareness, and it encourages us to build like a lasting change. So in short, this GPS app pilot doesn't just collect better data, but it engages residents, reveal behavior and seasonal nuances, and also it provides quick actionable insight as it's provide almost real-time data. So let's see how we actually implemented this. So there was like a very structured and step-by-step process that we have adopted in order to implement this pilot. And we started with solid planning, which includes designing the data framework and choosing the relevant indicators. And we selected participants as well. And while selecting participants, we focused on employees from companies that have already signed Gävle's climate contract. So it will be very easy to reach through their employers, we hoped. And the next step was the procurement. And also we tried to build like an awareness with a multi-channel communication, including social media, posting important information on our website, direct emails, and also printed out promotional materials. And also we launched the pilot like in different phase. We began with a very small test group of municipal employees in order to iron out all those technical issues that needs to be addressed before phasing it to the employees who are part of the Gävle climate contract. So we launched it in different phases. And for the purpose of validating the app, we also did a complimentary travel surveys for small groups, which in turn helped us compare the digital data to the traditional methods and checking its usability. And finally, we tried to analyze everything. So we processed the data, in order to visualize all those selected indicators, and we try to gain some insights from the data as well. Yeah, and when talking about the implementation, it's very important to mention about the stakeholders' engagement and key practicalities as well. So stakeholders were central. So we engaged employees from climate contract companies. We promoted the pilot internally as well, but participation varied depending on company priorities as well. And we have worked closely with the app provider, Kobla, in order to quickly resolve technical issues based on the user feedback. So the process was more or less iterative, which involved continuous adjustments to ensure meaningful data, despite starting small. Yeah, let's look at some of the results. By July 2025, we had around 647 participants, and 57 of all the recorded trips during that time were conducted by walking and cycling. And that is very encouraging, in my personal opinion. And it shows that among motivated people, active modes of transportations are already playing a major role in their daily travel. And in addition, the app captured rich data, like it captured travel distances, speeds, modes of transportation, and most importantly, it gives us route level detail. So you can see the heat map there, and it is very rich in data, and it gives us route level detail that we never had before. We managed to see also neighborhood passes, informal shortcuts, and also pedestrian desired lines that fixed counters completely overlook. And this somehow filled real gaps in our understanding of short and local active trips. The results were visualized in Grafana. The supplier had this web-based system, which is called Grafana, and we even processed it more in Excel in order to visualize our selected indicators, so that we can create clear heat maps of popular routes and travel patterns as well. Beyond the numbers, the pilot delivered wider benefits. Now we now have new quantitative data on walking and cycling behavior. It directly fills the existing knowledge gap. We gained deeper insights into how people perceive app-based tracking, how people perceive rewards, how people perceive gamification, what motivates them, and what frustrates them as well. And also, it also strengthened collaboration across municipal departments. We learned a lot about communication, how much effort it takes to engage companies and keep participants motivated from a policy angle. And also, we tried to see realistic opportunities that helps us shift shortcut trips to walking and cycling as well. And yeah, of course, we are very realistic. The sample size was very modest compared with our initial anticipation, which was 4,000. We were a bit ambitious, I would assume. And yeah, we are very realistic, and the sample size was modest. But because of this sample size, we don't expect direct policy change. But this was an experimental pilot, and it can be used as a learning exercise. It was very highly valuable and has already shaped how we plan future sustainable commuting campaigns. And it expanded our reach when it comes to data-driven mobility works as well. So from this pilot, we drew several clear, actionable lessons, things we would do differently next time. First, technology matters enormously. A stable, intuitive app is very critical for keeping people engaged and trusting the process. So early technical hiccups like battery drain, manual trip confirmation, occasional misclassification of modes of transportation, and poor language translation. And there was also glitches in the reward system as well. This caused a drop-off right after launch. After a couple of weeks, the amount of participants decreased, but we collaborated with the supplier and we managed to fix the issues, and we managed to see we managed to get also more users afterwards as well. So the big takeaway is test the app rigorously with a realistic number of diverse users before going wide. So second, communication is very important. It's literally everything. Effective outreach requires early planning, high quality materials, and continuous follow-up across different channels. And we had limited internal communication capacity, so we didn't reach as many people as we could have. But so in the future, we would dedicate more resource here. Third, governance and stakeholder management. So having clearly defined roles for project leadership, communication, and data handling makes execution much more smoother. And yeah, the other most important lesson is companies that participated in this pilot. They helped us, but their engagement level is it varied through time. Of course, they have different urgent and competing priorities. So we need to work on that in the future as well. Other key lessons. Messaging needs to be very careful and taught because we had a problem. We categorized public transport as non-sustainable, and this is like giving wrong information for the general public, and it gives mixed signal as well. So it can frustrate some users, and we need to always frame sustainability positively and inclusively. And participation quality matters. The broader, the more representative, the better. Administratively, data protection agreements and internal registration take longer time than initially anticipated. So we need to make sure that we have the resource and the time for administrative works. And our very small initial test group wasn't enough to catch everything, all the bugs, all the problems. So next time, test bigger. Overall, this pilot showed us that digital tools like a GPS-based app offer like tremendous potential for capturing rich year-round active mobility data, driving and also capturing behavioral aspects of it. But real success hinges on strong preparation, wide engagement, and the willingness to adapt quickly based on what you learn through time. So if you'd like to take some tips, I have like for other municipality, I have like some advices that really desire to replicate this. So start with strong preparation, test the app thoroughly with a realistic number of diverse users before launch, and try to catch all those errors like battery drains, usability problems as early as possible so that you can avoid discouraging participants. And the communication also must be planned from day one, invest in professional materials and use multiple channels. And limited capacity hurts like reach, so allocate dedicated time and support here as well. Try to expand the participation beyond one group, like try to include schools, hospital, universities, and other large employers for a more representative picture. Support your partners, and on the technical side, choose an app that is reliable, low friction, good auto detection, easy correction, and strong provider support. And that is from the technical part. Try to keep the messaging very clear and positive. Avoid labels that divide people, like calling public transport non-sustainable. It's a mistake that we've done. Gamification and simple incentives like badge, personal dashboard, local retailer rewards as well. It helps sustain engagement without high cost. And for data quality, always validate the app with surveys and counters, and consider hybrid sources like mobile network data for broader coverage in the future. And most importantly, try to build in feedback loops so that you can tweak things while the campaign runs. And to make it sustainable and scalable, try to secure budget early, scale by testing shorter first, and open campaigns and based on the visible wins like the monitoring and evaluation result, you can scale it even to to bigger audience. So my final recommendation is start small and start very structured, learn from every step, iterate, just like we did, and scale with the lessons that the lessons applied. So these digital pilots offer tremendous value for building better and data-informed active mobility policies, and specifically for Nordic city like Gävle. Yeah, thank you very much for your time. The main message from Gävle's pilots, I would say comprehensive, reliable data on walking and cycling is, of course, the foundation for real progress in urban mobility. And digital tools like GPS app campaign offer a very effective, engaging, and replicable way in order to get active mobility data. That's it for me.
Thank you, Aregay, for sharing your experiences and showing why we have to stop and monitor to check what we have done, what should be modified to really get the data we need to make modifications or decisions in mobility planning. And as we are almost out of time, then if you have any questions, please ask these in questions and answers section. And also to inform you, we decided that we are not going to skip some of the presentations. So if someone of you have to leave, then you can do it and you can check the recording later on. But yes, now we are taking the floor to us. So Andra Asser will start with different examples from different projects. How to engage citizens in the collection of data, and I'm going to take over at one point. So Andra, please.
Yes, thank you, and hello from me as well. Nice to see a big group here today. So we have a presentation on engaging citizens in data collection, in mobility data collection. So we've heard quite a few examples already. About different pilots, both in this module and previous modules. And you probably have a pretty good idea that engaging citizens is very, very valuable. So it helps add to the data quality. So numbers and sensors are one thing, but as Aage mentioned as well, real insight into people's motivations and reasons is a completely other thing, and that can be complementary to the so-called numerical data very well. It supports inclusive, evidence-based planning, as Kertu mentioned as well, that having good, sorry, the slides, something happened. So it supports evidence-based planning as well. As Kertu mentioned as well, that is very important for a city municipality to be able to make decisions not just based on assumptions, but actual data. And the more you include residents and citizens, the more trust, acceptance you will gain for different mobility interventions, even for things such as small temporary experiments. Citizens can be engaged through a variety of ways, so technical tools, but also citizen science approaches. So using different devices like Gävle did, the GPS-based mobile app, or even manual counters, which are still popular to this day. Then there are various digital engagement platforms. Kertu showed you an example of one as well. You can always go directly to the citizens, organize workshops, panels, focus groups, even one-on-one interviews. And then there are big platforms that combine both open data, but also provide you with the possibility to engage citizens through that data. So one approach maybe that isn't talked as much, but actually which Gävle used, as you saw in Aregay's presentation just previously, is more like a citizen science approach. So people aren't just passive subjects who are measured and counted, but they are the ones who are doing the measuring and counting. So they are the willing participants, the voluntary participants who act as data collectors. So this approach has many potential benefits. So as citizens essentially do this on a voluntary basis. It can be very low cost. It's usually very easy to scale. So increasing the sample size or the geographic reach. It's very highly representable of your target group because you can include various types of users. The users will track or count during different hours of the day, so not just during so-called traditional hours, but also on the weekends, after work, and so on. As it was mentioned before, that micromobility is often undercounted by traditional systems, so this is a good approach to target that as well. And by collaborating with different organizations, schools, employers, you can keep your recruitment costs down as well. So on the right here, you see one example of an external project. It's from Ljubljana, Slovenia, and the WeCount project, where they gave citizens traffic counting sensors to measure traffic. And this was a huge success, actually. But we have a few other examples from our projects as well, from the SUMPs projects. You heard about Gävle, who used a mobile app, which people downloaded. They allowed the app to track their movements, but also they gave corrections, gave a few insights with the app. Then another pilot from our project in Panavesis, they collaborated with the school, with students, parents, teachers, and they did manual counting of both cyclists and bike rack users. Then in Greifswald, Germany, the city tested sensor devices that were mounted on bikes. So this provided very valuable kind of real-time data, not only on distances, but also vibrations and the air quality, for example, which was very important for the municipality. And then I mentioned the WeCount project with the traffic counting sensors. So for them, this proved to be a very scalable model, which was very affordable and very good in building trust with the citizens as well, because they really felt a part of this project and not just the passive subjects being measured.
The citizens don't have to be just data collectors. They can also provide data. They can share their mobility experiences and insights via various methods, for example, workshops, surveys, and so on. And why to use citizens as data providers? There are several benefits. For example, it kind of explains the root causes of mobility behavior. Also to understand why someone prefers a certain route and avoids another, as was showed in case of Tartu, where we showed that some of the streets are not used, but why are not they used? Also, what are the issues with crowding, driver behavior, lightning? Maybe these are the reasons why people are not walking or using some of the paths. And another reason is that quite often you have a lot of quantitative findings, as mentioned also by Aregay. You may have a lot of information, but you don't understand what does it mean for you. Is it reliable? Can you do something with this data? So if you have this qualitative extra data from citizens, it kind of helps you to explain the findings you have from sensors, apps, AI monitoring. It also helps you to understand micro-level problems. For example, there may be some dangerous places, dangerous crossings, high curbs. There may be several reasons, and you don't understand these without asking from citizens. Also, it helps to include people who are underrepresented in digital or basic data collection methods. For example, if you collect information through apps, not all people use smartphones. Also, elderly people may not answer to questions that are carried out with, for example, QR codes. People with disabilities may not understand what you are asking, but you have this possibility to get the extra layer when you ask directly or engage them in different ways. and some examples how citizens have been as data providers. In Greifswald, citizens provided input via QR code feedback surveys that were attached to bike parking installations. And there were different questions about safety, comfort, and infrastructure needs. In Turku, they had different workshops and discussions and also citizen panels where people could offer feedback on their mobility experience. For example, the picture in the below, their group of people are walking and visiting the pilot area and giving feedback on in real life. What are the positive and negative aspects about plans? In Gdynia, they had enormous campaigns with students, and students provided workshop insights, map-based problem spots, different qualitative viewpoints on safety and cycling barriers. So they carried out different activities, collected the information, and compared it with AI results and other data they had. Years ago, we had the project Green SUMP in cooperation with Tartu as well. And there the focus was in older people, and we wanted them to start using bikes and also bike sharing. And we didn't understand why there is lack of usage by this stakeholder or target groups. And we went and asked from them. And also the city helpline feedback answers were used as input to plan mobility infrastructure changes. So you don't always have to carry out separate questionnaire, but you just collect and analyze the information you get from other ways. Maybe you have some meetings with the stakeholders. You have information lines. There are different options. And to get more examples, what and how to collect data, why is it important? In the Module 3 webpage, there are several learning materials where you get information, for example, about practical tools, guidelines, and case studies with different examples, exactly why and what to do, what to bear in mind to have the data you really can use in your mobility development. And that's all from our side, from different case studies all over the Baltic Sea region. And just some words before we leave, and I give the floor back to Ira, is that you've heard several valuable examples and explanations why we have to collect data, what to bear in mind. But we are going to continue in 2 weeks in a workshop, and to support you in developing your SUMPs and mobility data collection understandings, then we have created some exercises for you. You can find these from the homepage under Module 3. And these focus on your experiences, what and how you are doing in your city, how are you collecting data, what practices you have, and especially in walking and cycling. So please take the time, answer the exercise questions to identify the biggest gaps in sustainable mobility data collection in your city. And the second exercise is to prioritize these gaps. So next time when we meet, we can cover these different gaps and discuss all together what experiences other cities have, how they have solved their gaps. So thank you from my side, and Ira, please.
Thank you so much, Maarja and Andra, and a big thank you for all our other speakers, to Age, to Kertu and Aregay. And also thank you all for joining this webinar. And like Maarja said, we will meet next time on Wednesday, 18th of March at 9 o'clock for the Module 3 workshop. So please stay tuned, and we'll meet in this workshop or other upcoming webinars and workshops. Thank you and have a good day.